Your brain is running a marathon your calendar never warned you about. By midday, you've already waded through hundreds of small choices and interruptions, emails, chat pings, meeting invites, background noise. These inputs stack up until even simple decisions feel impossible. No wonder by 4 p.m. you're staring at the fridge like it's a logic puzzle. Your body looks fine on the outside, but your mind is begging for a reset. Science shows it takes up to 20 minutes to fully recover focus after an interruption. That's why exhaustion today isn't about muscle strain, it's about running biology in the wrong environment. And if it feels strange that sitting all day leaves you this drained, it's because the world around you isn't built for the body and brain you inherited. The biology mismatch. Picture the daily reality of early humans. Most waking hours revolved around motion, stalking game, digging for roots, hauling water, or trekking to temporary shelter. Energy was balanced between physical work and quick judgment calls. Fast forward to now and the imbalance is striking. We spend most of our hours stationary, staring at screens. And at the end of the day, it's rarely sore muscles that bother us, it's mental fatigue. This is the essence of the biology mismatch. Our energy systems evolved for bursts of physical survival, but our current environment funnels that same machinery into constant cognitive strain. The stress response illustrates this gap. For tens of thousands of years, a snap of a branch or a shadow in the distance triggered an adaptive surge. Heart racing, cortisol spiking, body primed to act. In today's workplace, those same circuits often interpret digital alerts and interruptions as threat-like signals. The difference is that instead of a handful of true emergencies in a week, we face dozens or even hundreds of minor disruptions in a single workday. Each ping or flashing notification nudges the nervous system into arousal. While the magnitude may not match a chase through the savannah, the fact that it repeats so frequently is why stress levels often stay elevated longer than biology intended. Part of the strain comes from what doesn't follow. When our ancestors' alarms went off, running or fighting siphoned away the stress hormones. In the office, you stay seated. The body mobilizes as if preparing to sprint, but the sprint never arrives. Muscles remain idle while stress chemicals swirl unspent. Researchers studying long bouts of sedentary, interruption-heavy work show that cortisol takes longer to return to baseline under these conditions, compared with periods of active work or intentional rest. That's why even when you aren't physically tired, the fatigue feels cellular and hard to shake. It's the nervous system looking for a destination it never reaches. You can think of this as metabolic misdirection. The brain burns an outsized share of the body's energy. Every time attention diverts to a new stimulus, glucose consumption rises. This is manageable in small doses, but when dozens of interruptions layer in across a day, the energy drain is abrupt and sustained. Evidence on attention residue supports this. After being pulled away, people take on average between 15 and 23 minutes to fully regain focus. Now pair that with findings that typical office workers are interrupted every few minutes. The math captures why we collapse without understanding where the effort went. The brain is sprinting constantly, recovering rarely. For many people, the sensation of arriving home unable to plan dinner or fold laundry feels like weakness or lack of will. But the pattern is biological, not personal. Our nervous system expects a rhythm of effort and release, physical action followed by recovery. Modern life instead delivers mental burden without the counterweight of movement. The mismatch isn't only in what triggers stress, but in how the cycle fails to resolve. That's why researchers describe today's condition as chronic activation, not in the sense that the system never quiets, but that it often stays elevated far past what survival requires. Over days and weeks, the wear becomes cumulative. It's important to stress that this doesn't mean the brain is broken. It's working exactly as it should in an environment it never evolved to handle. An email notification doesn't match the severity of a predator encounter, yet the circuitry treats it as a signal requiring vigilance. Calendar reminders, pop-ups, unread badges, each one a whisper that something needs immediate attention. The mind listens closely, flooding the body with readiness signals, but nothing physical burns off the surge. Over time, the baseline shifts toward fatigue that feels unearned, a constant low-level exhaustion hard to attribute to any one event. This cycle explains modern contradictions. how you can run a few miles and feel sharp afterward, but collapse after a day of sitting, scrolling, and toggling between tabs. Movement distributes energy use across muscles and restores balance. Digital interruptions pile energy costs almost exclusively onto the brain. And the mismatch amplifies because these interruptions never arrive all at once. They drip in, just enough to keep recovery out of reach. Studies confirm that hormonal spikes linger longer in sedentary, high interruption settings than in active ones. That means the tiredness you carry home isn't imagined, it's measurable, built into stress chemistry itself. There's also a psychological toll. Because the fatigue stems from sitting still, people mistake it for personal inadequacy. Workers think they shouldn't feel this drained because they barely moved. But the depletion is real, and its cause is structural. We've engineered an environment that asks the nervous system to fire too often, without offering the outlets it requires to reset. When the same stress pathways repeat all day, without resolution, the signal that once protected survival becomes the very reason decision-making and focus falter. Understanding this shift helps reframe blame. Feeling exhausted after a desk job is not proof of weakness. It's proof that your wiring is still human, carrying expectations forged by movement and scarcity, now asked to operate in a flood of alerts and stillness. The stress machinery revs, but the gears aren't engaged. Fuel burns, but nothing moves. Left unacknowledged, this mismatch can convince anyone they're underperforming, when in fact their biology is simply responding to misplaced signals. What this leaves us with is an invisible drain on energy. You sit still yet run empty, precisely because of the way stress reactions interact with modern routines. The mismatch isn't dramatic, it's subtle, constant, and cumulative, and it sets the stage for the next layer of the problem: why energy seems to vanish on days where you feel like you barely did anything at all. The silent battery drain. The hidden tax comes next, the silent battery drain that wears you down almost invisibly. You may not notice it moment to moment, but it builds until your mind feels heavy and unresponsive. Unlike a single major task that clearly demands effort, these drains come from minor, incomplete triggers that barely register. They sneak under your awareness, but they claim slices of energy all day long. Take unread emails as an example. A vague subject line like "quick question" sits in your inbox unresolved. You haven't opened it, but your brain hasn't dropped it either. It hangs there like an open loop waiting for closure, occupying a fraction of working memory. Or those meeting pauses, when someone asks for input, silence stretches, and you wonder whether to speak up or hold back. From the outside, it looks like nothing is happening. Inside, your nervous system has tightened, rehearsing possibilities. Neither of these moments looks like real work, yet both tax the same circuits that fatigue you later. This is what makes silent drain tricky. The triggers don't feel significant. They rarely change heart rate or breathing, but each one adds to the pile. The light hum overhead, the flicker from a coworker's phone, the slight background buzz of your environment, all of it nudges attention just enough that you never return to neutral. At first, it's almost unnoticeable, but the effect compounds across hours, like coins building weight in a pocket. By evening, what felt light in the moment has grown into a load that slows every step. Research on attention residue shows how persistent these costs are. When you switch from one task to another, say from reading an email thread to answering a chat, you never fully snap clean. Part of your attention remains tethered to the task you left. Stack enough of these fragments, and you start carrying dozens of incomplete threads at once. And here's the important anchor. Research shows your brain can take 15-23 minutes to fully refocus after an interruption. That means even minor disruptions ripple into long shadows of distraction you may not even notice. This is why light, scattered days often feel heavier than direct, demanding ones. Deep focus tasks engage sustained attention, allow closure, and release mental load at the end. Micro drains don't provide that payoff. They keep threads open, leaving no reset point. It's not that micro interruptions are always more damaging than big tasks. It's that their cumulative weight without closure erodes focus in a way a single stretch of deep work does not. You're left with cognitive clutter, like background tabs that never close, siphoning memory and energy. Imagine that by late afternoon you need to decide what to cook for dinner. It's a tiny decision, yet it feels impossibly heavy. That's not laziness, it's mental taxation. Every open loop takes a share of your resources, and by the end of the day, everything meaningful is already spoken for. For someone like Productive Patty, who prides herself on getting things done, this can feel like hitting a wall. But you're not lazy. You're carrying small, unfinished tasks in your head. And that load explains why you can't bring yourself to make even simple choices. The frustration grows because our brains rarely signal energy depletion accurately. With physical exertion, muscles fatigue, and you feel the burn. With cognitive exertion, there's no meter or warning. Tasks keep piling on, and you continue to push, unaware that control resources are already depleted. Then suddenly, you tip off the cliff, dragging your cursor, staring at a screen without reading, moving through tasks without direction. The crash feels abrupt when really it was accumulating silently. Too often, people assume the crash is personal weakness. They blame themselves for failing at easy days. But research instead points to the structure of modern work, the layered interruptions, unpredictable waits in meetings, constant small alerts. These are built into the system, not defects in personal willpower. Environments rich in micro-disruptions almost guarantee that workers finish depleted, regardless of how light the agenda looked on paper. It's structural fatigue disguised as inefficiency. And the difference between obvious fatigue and this invisible one is striking. After a long workout, muscles ache, but the mind feels earned and clear. After a scattered day, the body feels fine, but the brain feels gray and blank. It's the fatigue of fragments, mental loops never closed, energy diverted into constant low-level vigilance. That's why small fixes matter more than people expect. Silencing repeating notifications, batching similar tasks, setting clear boundaries to close loops. Each tweak doesn't just save minutes. It prevents residue from hanging around for hours. The silent drain doesn't scream for attention. It hums in the background. You don't feel spikes of exertion. You feel fog that makes ordinary life harder than it should be. That fog makes sense once you see it's generated by unresolved fragments. The cost isn't catastrophic blowouts. It's the accumulation of pings, pauses, and tiny pulls that prevent the brain from achieving resolution. When clarity never arrives, rest never does either. So the picture is clear. Small interruptions don't just irritate you, they redirect fuel away from where you need it most. They explain the kind of exhaustion that slips in without warning, making routine choices difficult and evenings feel like obstacles. And they don't drain you only by their presence. Each one sticks around, lingers, and drags attention forward. The explanation isn't weakness. It's the cost of mental residue repeating hour after hour. And that leads to the next challenge. Because every interruption doesn't just disrupt. Every switch you make comes with its own hidden tax, and multiplying that across a day creates a whole new level of drain. Switching and little demands don't just annoy you, they silently eat your fuel. Next comes the cost of constant switching. The cost of constant switching. Most of the hidden drain comes from constant pivots, the cost of switching. On paper, it looks harmless. Respond to a message, glance at a calendar, hop back into your main project. But those shifts are not neutral. Cognitive science calls them switch costs, the measurable loss in time and accuracy when moving between tasks. Each one looks small, yet when they repeat all day, the losses add up to hours. Multitasking feels like efficiency in motion. You open your inbox while still half listening to a meeting, or you alternate between editing numbers in a spreadsheet and typing into a chat box. It feels productive because the brain gives you a quick jolt of novelty each time you pivot. But the truth is, our brains can't do two demanding things at once. They toggle rapidly. And with every toggle, fragments remain behind. That leftover processing has a name: attention residue. After a switch, your brain doesn't instantly clear the previous context. Studies show it can take meaningful time to fully re-engage, often 15 to 20 minutes to regain prior concentration after an interruption. That means a notification you answered in 20 seconds quietly stole another 20 minutes from the focus you thought you still had. Multiply by dozens of interruptions, and entire portions of the day slip away without obvious explanation. Imagine writing a report. You're mid-sentence and a Slack notification pings. You skim it, type a 2-line response, and flip back to the report. In your head, you took a 30-second detour. But in reality, your mind now carries traces of both conversations, unfinished thoughts from the messaging thread, and the half-built sentence from your report. They compete in working memory. That confusion you feel when the words suddenly won't line up isn't distraction in the usual sense. It's the residue of the switch still humming. This is why multitasking is such a misleading term. We have the sensation of parallel action, but what's actually happening is rapid cycling, each shift carving away at efficiency. Researchers who measure these cycles find that knowledge workers switch very frequently, often every few minutes. And the more frequent the switches, the steeper the productivity drop. Some roles, like customer service or emergency response, require fast shifting because responsiveness matters more than depth. But for most knowledge work, the toll of constant pivots outweighs any apparent benefit. Sustained attention simply produces higher quality, faster work when compared against fragmented focus. The emotional layers of switching complicate it further. You can move from a calm budgeting task into a tense email from a colleague, then back again. The numbers on the screen don't carry emotion, but your nervous system does. That edge of irritation follows you back into the spreadsheet, consuming energy without your noticing. An hour later, a brainstorming session suffers not just from cognitive residue, but emotional residue too. These unacknowledged crossovers wear out clarity as much as the constant toggling of tasks. Surveys of modern professionals quantify the cost. Averaged over a week, frequent switchers lose nearly a full workday to fragmented attention. That's 6 or 7 hours gone, not to procrastination, but to mechanics. Each small pivot taxes your energy like a toll booth you can't skip. Leave one project midway, answer a chat, return, and you've paid twice, once in what was left behind, and again in the ramp-up to the new focus. A few tolls are manageable. Hundreds in a day explain why you reach evening running on fumes. And yet, switching feels rewarding in the moment. Each notification delivers a mild spark of novelty, a tiny burst of stimulation. The brain interprets this as progress, even if no single thread moves forward meaningfully. Over time, this trains your system to crave constant inputs. It creates a habit loop, scanning screens, checking inboxes, refreshing feeds. The busyness feels real, but the depth never arrives. Energy is exhausted while projects stall in half-finished stages. Think of your brain like a laptop forced to run too many programs at once. Nothing crashes outright, but everything slows. You can still type, read, and click, but try to render something complex and performance stutters. That's what constant context switching does at a biological level. Memory fragments fight for bandwidth, processing speed decreases, and concentration drains faster than it refills. The result shows up both in your body, as fatigue, and in your output, as smaller achievements stretched over longer hours. And the damage doesn't limit itself to work hours. Mental bandwidth that dissipates during the day leaves evenings clouded. Cooking dinner, making weekend plans, even choosing what to watch requires mental clarity to settle decisions. But the capacity spared earlier was already eaten by 1,000 pivots. By the time you want your energy for personal life, the reserves are gone. You're left staring at choices that feel heavier than they should. The important subtlety is that switching isn't evil in every situation. Some jobs demand rapid movement and varied attention. But for roles where the value comes from creating, solving, or thinking deeply, frequent toggling acts like a surcharge you can't recover. Understanding this doesn't mean eliminating every pivot. It means treating each one as costly instead of neutral. Accept the fee when it's necessary, but avoid paying dozens of them without noticing. A practical micro-step is to bundle the pivots instead of paying them all day long. Consider batching your messages into fixed windows, checking email at set times rather than on every ping. It doesn't erase all switches, but it reduces them enough to let focus stabilize. That stabilization is where you reclaim lost hours, not by extending your day, but by preserving attention. Even a few fewer switches unlock disproportionate returns because each one comes loaded with hidden recovery time. When you view switching as a fee instead of a shortcut, the exhaustion of modern work begins to make sense. It's not that your projects are impossible or that your capacities are failing. It's that your energy was sliced into fragments by design all day long. And when attention keeps splintering, tasks take more time while leaving you with less left over. The output suffers, and so does the sense of clarity you carry into the rest of life. That loss of clarity explains the strange moments of paralysis after a long day. Because switching doesn't just cut work efficiency, it leaves decision-making capacity thinner, worn down by hundreds of unacknowledged pivots. And that feeds directly into another hidden tax your brain pays each day, one that shows up not in the office, but the moment you're asked to make even the simplest of choices. Decision fatigue hits hard. Sometimes the real exhaustion doesn't come from what you did, but from what you had to decide along the way. And that's where decision fatigue hits hard. Think of the moment when you've opened a dinner menu after work and suddenly feel stuck, like choosing between two simple options is too much. That paralysis isn't about hunger. It's the crash that comes after carrying the weight of countless micro-decisions all day. Psychologists note that the average person makes thousands of small choices daily, from insignificant toggles to bigger ones. Most go unnoticed at the time, but the total drains the same mental resource pool. By evening, the well is so low that even a casual chicken or pasta feels monumental. The depletion shows up gradually. At the start of the morning, you fire off emails with focus, sort your calendar, maybe even squeeze in a few thoughtful replies. By late afternoon, each new decision starts to feel heavier than the last. The brain doesn't physically ache, but the process of choosing and regulating is tiring because it burns real energy. Neuroscience highlights that the prefrontal cortex, the portion responsible for evaluating options and exercising self-control, is one of the hungriest parts of the brain. Every act of deliberation consumes glucose and oxygen, which means repeated decision-making literally burns through finite fuel. The result isn't imagined, it's metabolic. And it's often invisible until you notice performance slipping. A one-line email that might take you 30 seconds to draft at 9 a.m. can stretch into 5 or 10 minutes by 4 p.m., with back-and-forth edits for wording you'd earlier type without hesitation. That slowdown isn't inefficiency, it's a hallmark of decision fatigue. Your resources are depleted, so the simplest choices expand into drawn-out struggles. That's what makes the fatigue so frustrating. It doesn't announce itself, it drags your work into longer loops. Consider how many choices pile up before you even hit your main assignments. Do you start with the red email badge or the blinking chat bubble? Camera on or off for the meeting? Do you respond now or leave it unread? Each option is trivial, but each one taps the same energy supply. By lunchtime, you've spent more fuel on small positioning choices than on the meaningful projects you actually care about. And because the brain doesn't distinguish trivial from important in terms of cost, you use up your budget just as quickly on the noise as on the signal. Where muscle fibers grow stronger with continued training, willpower doesn't scale that way. Each small decision runs down what's left of control. That's why you can power through difficult projects in the morning with clarity, but end up staring blankly at Netflix tiles at night, unable to settle on a show. The failure isn't intelligence, it's supply. The resource governing choice has thinned. Once it's spent, even ordinary decisions start to collapse into endless loops of hesitation. And much of this burnout comes from the way the workday is structured. Modern workflows demand a constant stream of micro-decisions. You don't just receive assignments, you decide when to switch documents, which alert to check, whether to respond immediately or delay, whether to mute one more ping or leave it on. None of this is formally tracked as work, yet it eats through mental currency one coin at a time. The design ensures you face choice clutter before you ever get to the tasks that matter. The problem extends beyond visible tasks, too. It shows up in self-regulation. You negotiate with yourself over a second cup of coffee, you weigh whether to interrupt in a meeting, you decide whether to recheck your to-do list. Each is slight, but each requires restraint or redirection. Over the span of hours, those micro-calculations leave you depleted. By late afternoon, instead of choosing with clarity, you avoid choosing at all by scrolling, procrastinating, or freezing on minor options. The system that handled decisions earlier has simply run dry. Behavioral research points to a straightforward insight. The fewer decisions you face in a day, the more energy you conserve for the choices that matter. Successful strategies aren't limited to better choices, but fewer choices altogether. Workers who standardize trivial decisions, preset meal plans, consistent morning routines, or turning notifications into scheduled checks, report that they preserve far more energy for creative and analytical work. The lift comes from reducing background clutter, not from gritting teeth and pushing harder. Think of your decision energy like a daily budget. If most of it is spent by mid-morning on trivial toggles, no wonder afternoons become sluggish. But if you deliberately cut through minor pulls, say by batching messages into specific blocks or by automating low-level tasks. You arrive in the afternoon with enough credit left to actually invest in concentrated projects. The difference isn't a new skill appearing later in the day. It's the survival of your mental resources into hours when most people have already burned out. And studies confirm the effect. Reducing decision points, even modestly, measurably improves long-term energy and creativity. In trials, workers who trimmed their daily micro-decisions by about 25% not only maintained higher focus, but also ended the week with less emotional exhaustion compared to peers. The implication is clear. Decision fatigue isn't something you're doomed to, it's largely shaped by the environment and the structure you work within. Simplify that structure, and you preserve fuel. So the takeaway is practical. Aim not just at making smarter choices, but at making fewer. Build systems to cap small drains before they surface. Pre-plan meals so dinner is one less thing to weigh. Draft response templates to batch quick messages. Automate recurring actions once instead of evaluating every time. Each predictable step removes a hidden pull on your limited budget. By stripping away dozens of decisions that never needed your attention, you free energy for projects that benefit from it most. Once you imagine decision fatigue as a mechanical drain rather than a personal flaw, its patterns start to make sense. Struggling to order food isn't laziness. It's evidence that by evening you've spent your decision credits on countless fragments you never consciously valued. And that isn't a failure of willpower. It's the predictable outcome of how work is presently structured. This is why preserving decision energy is so important. It explains why afternoons feel murky, why small choices overwhelm, and why genuine focus vanishes long before bedtime. But seeing the mechanism also opens the door to solutions. Decision fatigue isn't permanent. Structure, routines, and simplified workflows can protect your reserves. And those reserves are exactly what you'll need once you realize the modern environment doesn't just confuse your choices. It actually hijacks your biology with every alert, buzz, and ping you encounter. Notifications as predators. A big piece of that depletion comes from something small enough to fit in your pocket. Notifications have become the modern equivalent of predator signals, short, sharp cues that jolt your nervous system, whether you want them to or not. The metaphor works because the same alert circuits that once prepared humans to react to a rustle in the bushes still respond to sudden noises or vibrations. To the conscious mind, it's just a buzz or a chime. To the unconscious wiring, it's a possible threat that demands attention. Here's what happens under the surface. Each alert sets off a low-level arousal response. Heart rate ticks up slightly, stress hormones like cortisol release, and the body diverts energy toward readiness. Researchers explain that these bursts are adaptive, they prime you for quick action. The catch is context. In a digital environment, the action is tapping a screen or scanning a preview, not physical movement. Without physical release, recovery is slower, and those brief spikes linger longer than intended. Over time, frequent alerts mean the nervous system stays semi-activated for hours at a stretch. Viewed one at a time, a buzz doesn't feel like much, but dozens or even hundreds spread across a day create near-constant activation. This is why someone can sit still for hours yet feel as though they've run sprints. The cumulative effect doesn't show up as sweat or sore muscles. It shows up as irritability, scattered focus, and a baseline tension in the body that refuses to let up. Researchers studying office settings have found that fragmented digital alerts are among the most reliable predictors of sustained stress markers, especially for sedentary workers. It's a mistake to classify apps, emails, and pings as minor distractions. Each one asks your brain to evaluate, urgent or ignorable. Do I respond now or later? Even ignoring costs something, because the circuits for decision-making activate just long enough to deplete fuel. That's how an alert from a random group chat and a critical work message both drain you, not because of their content, but because of the constant need to assess them in real time. Variation makes matters worse. Some notifications mean deadlines, some mean conversations, some mean marketing nudges engineered to lure you back. Your nervous system doesn't categorize content, it reacts first, filters later. So each ping produces a small preparatory spike, then forces the cognitive system to sort meaning afterward. That sorting loop repeats dozens of times daily, fragmenting focus even if you decide not to act. By the time you reach the evening, it's not the specific messages you've read that hollowed your reserves. It's everything your biology did on the path to skimming them. There's also the layer of anticipation. Even when phones are silenced, many people report a restless sense that something is waiting. Researchers call these phantom vibrations or phantom alerts, the sensation that the phone buzzed when it didn't. That sensation isn't imaginary. It's the nervous system, trained into constant readiness, priming itself for the next cue before it even arrives. In evolutionary terms, being ready too often was safer than being caught off guard once. In modern terms, it means carrying vigilance into every quiet moment. Think about group chats alone. A single active thread can fire dozens of notifications in under an hour. You may not reply to them all, but you're still checking previews, assessing importance, and experiencing micro spikes of arousal again and again. That's dozens of false alarms before lunch, and each one pulls a little bit more fuel from the tank. Layer this across email, calendar reminders, productivity apps, and social feeds, and the daily tally is staggering. For many workers in 2025, triple-digit notifications are standard. At that scale, recovery time never keeps up. The body's stress machinery wasn't designed to stay somewhat on around the clock. It was built for sharp peaks followed by movement and then full recovery. With notifications, you get sharp peaks, almost no movement, and little recovery before the next peak. The outcome isn't catastrophic crisis, it's chronic elevation, just high enough to sap clarity, but not so high that you're forced to stop. That always wired, never rested feeling people describe is exactly this: the nervous system hovering in mid-alert mode all day. This cycle explains why the end of the day so often feels inexplicably heavy. You may look back at your workload and wonder how so little output created so much fatigue. The answer hides in the physiology. The drain sensation isn't laziness or inefficiency, it's the metabolic price of responding to cues that were never real threats in the first place. Each buzz was a practice drill that burned energy without resolution. By the 20th drill of the morning, you felt worn for reasons you couldn't pin down. By the 100th, exhaustion was inevitable. Even attempts to turn off alerts don't fully solve the problem because the expectation remains. Silence often feels ominous, as if unseen messages are piling up. This kind of watchfulness keeps your thought process tilted toward scanning, never fully relaxed. Whether alerts arrive or not, the brain keeps monitoring for them. That vigilance is work, and the toll shows up in how you struggle to regain focus, even in quiet settings. Looking at it this way reframes what might seem like normal digital life. Notifications aren't just shallow irritations, they're structural stressors mismatched to how our bodies are wired. The fight-or-flight system can't distinguish between an email chime and a twig snapping in the dark. In principle, that's good design. It kept humans alive for millennia. In our reality, it means we've built tools that ping those survival pathways constantly for non-lethal, low-value reasons. The result is fatigue that feels unearned because the predators never show. But none of this has to be destiny. The same research that unpacks how alerts drain energy also points toward ways of reshaping the cycle. One of the simplest strategies is reducing unpredictability. Bundling notifications into fixed windows instead of allowing constant interruptions removes the sense of random predator cues. This shift helps the nervous system actually relax between alerts rather than staying on edge all day. Even small changes, like checking messages at set intervals, can restore hours of focus by reducing ambient arousal. This isn't the whole solution, but it previews part of the system we'll outline later. For now, it's enough to see that every buzz you allow is not cost-free. It's a tax on attention and energy reserves, the same reserves you need for meaningful work and for life outside the screen. Protecting them starts with recognizing that a small sound in your pocket is not so small when multiplied endlessly. When you grasp that a notification trains your body like a false predator, the exhaustion of digital days begins to look predictable instead of mysterious. But alerts aren't the only signals feeding this cycle. Some platforms don't just interrupt your attention, they hijack the reward system itself, keeping you locked in far longer than you planned. And that's where the next drain begins. Social media's dopamine trap. Scrolling often feels like a break, but your nervous system doesn't register it that way. To your biology, time in a feed is not recovery, it's stimulation. You might sit down thinking you're giving yourself rest, only to look up an hour later feeling oddly unsettled, as though your brain has been working the entire time, because in a real sense, it has. The first hidden drain of social feeds lies in the constant micro-decisions. Each swipe isn't just your thumb moving, it's a choice. Do you keep going, stop, watch, skip, like, respond, or share? Your prefrontal cortex processes all of these, whether you notice or not. Individually, they seem trivial, but stacked together, they form the same kind of residue you carry from more obvious work. What felt like downtime was actually another stretch of decision-making, with your brain paying a tax for every motion. Then comes the unpredictability that keeps you locked in. This is no accident. Platforms rely on what behavioral scientists call variable rewards. It's the same mechanism slot machines use. Sometimes the next pull delivers something exciting, sometimes it doesn't, and that uncertainty is precisely what makes people keep pulling. In your feed, one post makes you laugh, another hits hard emotionally, the next sparks irritation. The brain gets tugged into microcycles of reward and reorientation. That unpredictability heightens arousal and increases engagement, but it consumes mental energy with every swing. For young viewers, one of the clearest examples is the rapid emotional whiplash. You'll laugh at a meme, then seconds later scroll into a post that's heavy or stressful. Your brain doesn't glide effortlessly between those states. Each shift triggers chemical adjustments, dopamine for the light content, perhaps cortisol for the heavier one. That roller coaster keeps you hooked, but also leaves you foggy afterwards. This isn't rest, it's work disguised as leisure. Another central piece is dopamine itself. When you encounter a post you enjoy, you get a small dopamine hit. But dopamine's role isn't only about pleasure. It fuels pursuit. It reinforces the drive to keep looking, to continue searching for the next positive hit. That system, originally meant to help humans track food or rewards in the wild, gets hijacked when you scroll. Instead of feeling satisfied, you're nudged into chasing the next one without end. The reward shrinks, but the drive to continue persists. This is how feeds create habit-forming behavior rather than true rest. You feel compelled to keep going, even if enjoyment diminishes. Importantly, this isn't addiction in the clinical sense. It's habit reinforcement through mechanisms your brain can't easily resist. Some studies now show correlations between heavy social media use and shifts in attention and reward processing, suggesting the brain is adapting under constant overstimulation. That doesn't mean irreversible damage, but it does imply that scrolling trains your circuits in ways that bias toward checking and rechecking instead of settling into stillness. You can feel this in the aftereffects. Many people notice they come away from a session more anxious or restless, not calmer. That isn't weakness. It's the outcome of stacking micro-dopamine surges followed by mini dips hundreds of times in a row. The dips become more noticeable than the brief lifts, leaving you unsettled. Over the long run, that low-grade restlessness shows up most clearly when quiet feels uncomfortable, when you close the app but feel almost compelled to open it again just to fill the silence. Sleep is another casualty. Research consistently shows screen time before bed disrupts natural wind-down rhythms, delaying melatonin release and cutting into deep sleep cycles. Social feeds intensify this, not only because of the light, but because your brain stays emotionally activated at the worst possible time. Scrolling was supposed to help you relax. Instead, it primes you for another hour of searching, nudging sleep further away. The next morning, fatigue deepens, not because you were too busy, but because what you thought was rest was disguised stimulation. The cognitive load adds another layer. Every clip, every post, every sound leaves small imprints. Your memory systems evolve to treat incoming information as potentially useful, and though much of what you see in a feed is disposable, your brain doesn't dismiss it instantly. It catalogs fragments, some of which stick. After even 20 minutes of scrolling, your attention is scattered by the residue of dozens of unrelated impressions. This is why focus feels harder to recover after using an app. You brought clutter back with you, not clarity. Even light users don't escape the loop, because the design itself engineers continuation. Infinite scroll removes natural endpoints. When you read a book, finish a chapter, or reach a page break, your mind gets a cue for closure. Social feeds avoid those cues entirely. The page never ends, so your brain stays alert, waiting for the stop signal that never comes. Without closure, you're more likely to overshoot the amount of time you intended, and even when you close the app, your mind remains half open, expecting unfinished business. Add to that the social comparison effect, watching highlight reels of other lives in rapid sequence, and your nervous system is taxed further. Sometimes it's envy, sometimes guilt, sometimes a fleeting inspiration. But all those emotional jolts cost energy, and because they're artificial snapshots, they rarely resolve. You carry them forward unresolved, another strand of residue that makes focus shallower later on. Across a week, those moments accumulate into something noticeable. Not a dramatic crash, but a dull, steady drag, more fog during work, more restlessness during downtime, more difficulty dropping into sleep. To the user, it looks like inexplicable fatigue. To a researcher, it looks like stimulation cycles repeated far past what the nervous system is calibrated for. And the practical effect is the same. Scrolling leaves you with less energy than you had when you opened the app. This isn't about demonizing social media. It's about recognizing that what feels like rest isn't serving as rest. Scrolling mimics the form of a break, sitting down, leaning back, but denies the function of one. It trades stillness for constant microprocessing, closure for endless pursuit, restoration for overstimulation. Feeds thrive on exhaustion because when you are tired, you are more likely to open them again. The cycle repeats not because you're weak, but because the system rewards persistence in ways biology finds hard to resist. And that's where the trap gets sharper, because the fatigue you feel after scrolling doesn't stop when the app closes. It follows you back into work, diluting focus for the tasks that matter. It follows into evenings, where important personal choices feel heavier than they should. It even echoes into mornings, when sleep debt demands repayment. The illusion of downtime drains the very currency you were trying to restore. Escaping the loop doesn't mean abandoning technology altogether. It means reclassifying scrolling for what it is: stimulation, not rest. Once you stop framing it as recovery, you can start giving yourself alternatives that truly restore energy. Activities with closure, with movement, with clear emotional resolution, reading short fiction, taking a walk, sharing a conversation, deliver rest because they give the nervous system what it needs to reset. Scrolling never does. So the next time you feel the instinct to take a break with your feed, remember that the system is working you harder than you realize. Each swipe is a decision, each surprise is a small jolt, each reward is a setup for the chase. The fatigue you feel afterwards isn't mysterious. It's the signature of a nervous system tricked into labor while you thought you were disconnected. And as we'll see, scrolling is only one piece of modern digital exhaustion. The environments where we spend most of our working hours come with their own energy drains that are just as measurable and just as costly. Zoom rooms and digital exhaustion. People joke about Zoom fatigue as if it's just a meme about too many meetings, but by 2025, it stopped being funny, it became measurable. Video meetings make up a significant portion of hybrid work hours now, and behind every call your brain is working harder than you realize. Watching a grid of faces on a laptop looks simple, but the hidden drain is in the constant adjustments your brain has to make just to keep the interaction moving. After 3 or 4 calls stacked together, the wear isn't minor. It's one of the main reasons people end their day mentally drained without knowing why. The first problem is structural. Human conversation evolved for face-to-face interaction, not pixelated grids. In the real world, we read posture, gestures, even subtle shifts in the room. On video, much of that disappears. The brain, wired to crave missing cues, overexerts itself trying to compensate. You work harder to catch tone without seeing a full body. You analyze pauses that may be caused by lag. You squint at microexpressions distorted by bandwidth. This undercover translation process takes energy. And because nothing about it feels like work in the moment, you rarely realize the cost until the call ends. Then comes the eye contact problem. In person, eye contact rises and falls naturally. You look, you glance away, you shift your gaze. A camera freeze frames that option. Looking away too often feels unsafe, but locking eyes nonstop with a camera feels unnatural. Meanwhile, you're watching yourself in a corner box, being both speaker and audience. This constant self-monitoring, what researchers call mirror anxiety, forces the brain's executive systems to run overtime. Whether you're listening, talking, or staying silent, you're checking your own facial expression at the same time. That double duty eats focus like a second job layered onto the meeting. Small delays magnify the load. A 1-second lag means two people start talking, both stop, then both try again. In person, body language smooths this out. Online, it becomes awkward silence. That constant internal debate, should I jump in now or wait again, forces more self-regulation. Multiply that across an entire workday, and you've spent hours managing rhythm instead of discussing ideas. Those micro-frictions seem small, but they stack into heavy residue. You leave meetings with a foggy sense of depletion that no calendar entry shows. The social performance layer makes it even worse. Camera-on policies, now standard in many organizations, create a constant obligation to appear engaged. That doesn't just mean listening. It means nodding enough, smiling just right, suppressing every natural expression of fatigue or boredom. Suppression itself is costly. Cognitive science shows that overriding natural impulses, like holding back a sigh or keeping your face meeting ready, burns resources at the same level as making active decisions. So by simply sitting still on a call while pretending attentiveness, your brain is draining fuel it desperately needs later. Research consistently finds that camera-on mandates correlate with higher self-reported fatigue compared to calls with optional video. And the explanation is simple. With your camera off, you're not performing. With it on, you're multitasking between the meeting and the unspoken monitoring of your own face. Even if the meeting itself is light, that constant act of keeping up appearances quietly pulls energy away. If you've ever left a short meeting feeling strangely heavy, chances are it wasn't the content, it was the invisible pressure of being watched. Another hidden cost is retention. Data from workplace studies show that people remember less from video meetings compared to in-person discussions. The reason isn't that they're not paying attention, it's that their processing power is split. So much energy goes into staying visible, reading distorted cues, and watching themselves that there's less left for deep absorption. By the time the call is over, important details slide away, making follow-up tasks harder. Video doesn't just pull clarity during the meeting, it cuts into focus afterward. The structure of scheduling worsens the fallout. In many workplaces, video calls are stacked back to back. In the physical world, moving between meeting rooms gave the brain decompression time, walking down a hall, shifting posture, resetting awareness. Online, you close one tab and open another instantly. That zero-gap transition means leftover fragments from one call crash into the opening of the next. Psychologists call this attention residue. At the end of a stacked day, you're not just holding one thread, you're juggling 5 or 6 unresolved conversations at once. No wonder the battery runs flat long before dinner. Multitasking within video calls only compounds the issue. You keep a notepad open on the side, respond to a couple of emails, maybe tweak a presentation while listening. On the surface, you're making the most of your time. In reality, you're fragmenting your focus further. Every switch costs reorientation, so when the call ends, you can't quite recall the decisions made, nor the work you tried to do during it. Instead of squeezing value out of your hours, you drag residue forward, spending more energy later trying to reconstruct what already happened. A survey of modern professionals shows video conferencing now covers more than a quarter of many employees' average workweek. That's hours each day spent in conditions that look calm but burn an outsized cognitive bill. And unlike physical tiredness, this fatigue rarely carries the satisfaction of effort. You don't end the day feeling accomplished. You end it gray and scattered, wondering where your fuel went. The paradox is clear. Casual in-person chats once energized workplaces, while their video substitutes leave people dimmed. The encouraging part is that this isn't unfixable. Experiments at firms that shifted policies saw measurable changes. When cameras were optional, fatigue scores dropped. When meetings had strict time limits, clarity improved. Shorter participant lists meant smoother conversation and less drain. The pattern was obvious. The less performance demanded, the less energy burned. None of this requires eliminating video. It requires reshaping it into something human systems can actually sustain. And for individuals, small interventions make meaningful difference. If you're someone like Productive Patty, trying to hold energy across long days, One way to cut the toll is scheduling micro-rests between calls. Even a 2-minute standing break, a stretch, or a moment with eyes off the screen interrupts the cycle of residue. It won't solve the structural mismatch, but it can stop the slide from becoming overwhelming. Those brief resets restore just enough clarity to prevent the entire afternoon from feeling lost. What all of this comes down to is that Zoom rooms are not neutral tools. They impose a biological cost: strained cue processing, distorted eye contact, self-monitoring, compressed schedules, and endless performance. Individually, the effects seem manageable. Together, they explain the collapse of energy that follows a day online. Organizations that equate constant visibility with productivity are in effect trading employee clarity for the illusion of attentiveness. And the bill gets paid at night when workers crash, restless and drained, unable to summon focus for anything outside of work. That last piece matters most, because the exhaustion from continuous digital presence doesn't stop with your job. It spills forward into personal hours, blunting energy you plan to spend elsewhere. And for many, it doesn't just disrupt evenings. It shows up late at night, when you're finally alone with your screens, pulling you into one more cycle you never intended to enter. Revenge bedtime procrastination. Why do you find yourself still scrolling long after midnight, eyes heavy, but refusing to close? That's not a failure of willpower. It's a phenomenon psychologists call revenge bedtime procrastination. It happens when the day has felt completely consumed by outside demands, and late-night hours become your only chance to reclaim time for yourself. It's a common coping response to stress and loss of control, and though it feels like a small act of autonomy, the trade it forces is hidden. You borrow from tomorrow's energy to pay for tonight's rebellion. During the day, you move through calendars, deadlines, and interruptions, reacting more than choosing. By evening, your nervous system pushes back. That's where the scrolling comes in. Staying awake late makes the day feel like it wasn't entirely swallowed by work and obligations. It delivers a sense of freedom. But the irony is that this freedom cuts into recovery. Instead of gaining ground, you start tomorrow behind, because those lost hours were the only chance your brain had to repair itself. The roots of this cycle are physiological as much as psychological. All day long, your brain has been revved by constant novelty, alerts, switches, decisions. By nighttime, your system struggles to downshift into stillness. Quiet becomes uncomfortable, even alien, after hours of stimulation. That discomfort nudges your hand back to the phone not because the content is meaningful, but because your nervous system craves one more hit of novelty before allowing rest. Autonomy and stimulation get tangled, convincing you that scrolling is soothing when it's actually prolonging the strain. The urge isn't about curiosity. Most nights, you're not searching for anything in particular. You scroll past posts that barely register, clips that don't hold lasting interest. What your brain is craving is not the content itself, but the proof of control. The irony is that the platforms you choose for this autonomy are designed to do the opposite. They keep you hooked. By feeding unpredictable rewards, they push your dopamine system into pursuit mode. Each new swipe reignites the chase, making it harder for your mind or body to shut down. And then comes the biological tax. That blue light pouring off the screen may feel harmless, but it directly interferes with melatonin, the hormone signaling your body that it's time to sleep. Suppressing melatonin doesn't just delay when you fall asleep, it also fragments how deeply you sleep once you do. Even if you manage 6 or 7 hours in bed, the cycles are shallow, robbed of the restorative stages your brain and body depend on. That's why you wake foggy, not because you got no sleep, but because the sleep you had lacked depth. Researchers point out that the quality loss compounds as much as the hours lost, undermining focus, memory, and mood the next day. The loop is easy to describe, hard to escape. You go through a day of mental clutter, end it by rebelling with more stimulation, shorten the sleep window, and pay twice, less time and worse quality rest. The next morning begins under deficit, so the day feels heavier than it should. By night, the craving for freedom intensifies, so you push sleep again. What began as a coping mechanism becomes a cycle of depletion. Energy never fully returns, choices feel harder, and exhaustion starts to appear permanent. Morning brain fog often gets mistaken for laziness or bad habits when it's really residue from this loop. Scrolling until you stumble into sleep means your body slams from high stimulation into a shallow rest state, instead of unwinding gradually. Imagine forcing an engine running at full speed to stall without slowing down. That's what your system endures every night of bedtime procrastination. The result is waking with unfinished signals still humming, dragging through your first hours instead of starting refreshed. What makes this behavior so sticky is that it grows from a real psychological need. People don't resist sleep simply to waste time. They do it because the day felt controlled, and those short hours finally feel like theirs. It is freedom, but it's counterfeit, offered at the cost of the one thing you actually need: recovery. Giving an hour to the scroll takes twice that in lost sleep efficiency. It's a trade that looks like self-care, but keeps your nervous system locked in strain. And because the habit is so common, it hides in plain sight. Everyone assumes reaching for a phone in bed is normal, part of modern life. Few recognize it as an energy debt loop. But what looks casual is structural. Overstimulation plus delayed rest equals accumulated exhaustion. You don't feel the trade in the moment, but by repeating it night after night, you ensure every morning starts behind schedule, even before work begins. The longer it continues, the harder it is to stop. Many people notice evenings shift from winding down to chasing stimulation. Stop scrolling and you feel restless. That's not weakness, it's conditioning. Your biology has been taught all day to expect another input. At night, it follows the same track, reinforcing itself rather than loosening. Over weeks or months, this doesn't just disrupt bedtime, it reshapes your rest cycle entirely. Tired becomes the default, not the exception. Even deciding to break the cycle feels impossible once it takes hold. People blame themselves, thinking they lack discipline, but no amount of self-criticism helps. A brain spun up by constant input will not calm just because you command it to. The pull isn't laziness, it's momentum. That's why advice like just sleep earlier rarely works. Without a structured change to how you transition into rest, the nervous system keeps pulling you toward the same pattern. The reality is that late-night scrolling is often less about entertainment and more about reclaiming choice. But in regaining control over your time, you lose control over your energy. That exhaustion then colors every decision tomorrow, reinforcing the struggle you were trying to escape. Recognizing that loop is the first step toward shifting it. And here's one small experiment that makes the shift tangible. For 1 week, try what researchers call a digital sunset. Pick just 2 nights to move your device out of your bedroom and replace the last screen time with something calmer, reading, journaling, or even nothing at all. Then pay attention to how your mornings feel compared to the nights you kept the phone nearby. Don't force the full change at once. Treat it as a test. This single adjustment ties directly into the audit phase we'll cover soon, and it gives you a real comparison you can comment on and learn from. Revenge bedtime procrastination feels like a personal quirk, but it's really another pattern of energy loss built into modern routines. And just like the others, it doesn't play out in isolation. Its effects stack on top of every other drain already running in the background, making each one feel heavier than it might on its own. The compound effect of energy debt. Energy debt is not a single drain pulling you down. It's the way multiple drains pile on top of one another and multiply their impact. This is the compound effect. The idea that fatigue doesn't just add up, it stacks and amplifies until the burden feels far heavier than the individual parts. Research on workload and decision-making backs this up. Small, repeated draws on attention and self-control accumulate like interest in a loan. 1 or 2 minor drains may be manageable, but combined across a day or week, they settle into a deficit you can never quite close, leaving you weaker than you realize. Consider the architecture of a typical day. Decision fatigue begins almost immediately with breakfast choices, emails before 9 a.m., and the to-do list that reshuffles as new demands arrive. That alone makes focus thinner. Add notifications. Each vibration or ping acts as a sudden cue, pulling the brain into mild arousal mode, sparks of readiness repeated dozens of times. Then layer context switching, the hidden switch cost that comes from bouncing between chats, projects, and meetings. By mid-afternoon, the entire system runs slower, not from one disastrous task, but from dozens of small pulls feeding into the same limited pool of cognitive resources. Sleep plays its part too. A restless night doesn't stay in its lane. It amplifies every other drain the next day, from decision fatigue to irritability, creating a multiplier effect rather than separate, isolated costs. This is why exhaustion often feels so much greater than the visible output of your day. You sense that nothing monumental happened, yet you're depleted as though you carried a load uphill. Each drain interacts with the others, reinforcing weaknesses. Decision fatigue makes you more reactive to notifications. That jumpiness lowers your resistance to switching, which fractures focus further. The fragments and stress then nudge you toward late-night scrolling, which undermines sleep, sending the whole cycle into tomorrow with less fuel than before. Fatigue isn't one battle lost, it's a chain reaction. And like financial debt, the real danger is how it accumulates quietly over time. Failing to recover on Monday doesn't just leave you flat on Tuesday. It reduces the baseline from which Tuesday starts. Miss enough recovery across days, and by Friday, you're not only working with that day's losses, but the pile of every deficit left unresolved. Experiments in workplace research describe this as cumulative fatigue, a slow decline where even weekends no longer feel restorative enough to balance the account. You pay interest on the fatigue you didn't address earlier in the week. Picture your energy as a checking account. Notifications are little micro-withdrawals, decision fatigue is an ongoing tax, switching is a hidden transaction fee, and poor sleep is the compounding interest. You may not notice each event individually, but the statement always arrives. That afternoon crash is the moment the account balance reveals itself, far lower than you expected because you didn't feel every single deduction as it happened. This invisibility makes it harder to fight because you can't point to one thief. It's a dozen small ones acting together. But compounding works in both directions. The same feedback loops that deepen depletion can also build momentum toward recovery. Small, repeatable changes create ripple effects that go further than they appear. Muting even a fraction of your notifications, for example, lightens decision fatigue because your brain no longer has to constantly judge which ping matters. Lighter decisions lead to clearer afternoons. Clearer afternoons mean more control at night, which leads to better sleep. Better sleep strengthens your focus the next day, which makes you more resistant to distraction. A single lever tilts the system forward into a new trajectory. Studies in workplace design reinforce this. Companies that gave employees structured focus blocks or reduced interruptive alerts saw not only measurable gains in productivity, but also self-reported improvements in mood and energy. Workers described afternoons that felt lighter and evenings where energy carried further. The improvement wasn't just about fewer alerts. It was about how one reduction lessened the weight of other drains downstream. That's the compound effect working in reverse, accumulation of clarity instead of depletion. This is why attempts to overhaul every habit at once so often fail. People, frustrated by exhaustion, decide they'll fix everything: sleep earlier, block distractions, reduce tasks, overhaul routines. The size of that plan collapses under its own weight. Biology doesn't respond well to dramatic overhauls under fatigue. It reverts to easy defaults. Small interventions, however, create leverage. Reducing noise from just one channel of alerts or pre-deciding one repetitive choice each day is enough to set off the positive chain. The result is that a modest action carries forward. Momentum matters more than scale. If you sleep 30 minutes more tonight, tomorrow feels sharper. That clarity makes tough decisions less draining. Less decision fatigue reduces the impulse to scroll late, reinforcing better sleep the following night. Within 2 weeks, that extra 30 minutes compounds into hours of reclaimed clarity across your days. Small moves ripple as strongly as small drains. The difference this time is that the compounding builds energy instead of consuming it. What's crucial is recognizing that the enemy isn't a single villain, but the interaction between many. That's why single fixes feel thin when isolated. You get off social media, but stay buried in chat notifications, and fatigue lingers. You improve sleep, but spend the day switching constantly, bleeding clarity anyway. The cycle only shifts when compounding itself is redirected. And the good news is, redirection doesn't require perfection. It requires nudging just one variable at a time until loops lean in your favor. Too often, people imagine escaping exhaustion means rebuilding their entire life or summoning willpower they never seem to have. The structure of energy debt shows why that belief misleads. Small, targeted steps multiply quickly, pre-planning simple meals for a week, closing your laptop half an hour earlier, turning off just one repetitive alert. These are minor inputs, yet each one influences multiple drains at once. The system rewards small wins disproportionately, the same way it punishes small leaks. So here's a simple prompt worth pausing on right now. What is one small drain you know you could remove today? Just one, whether it's silencing a thread, setting a 2-minute break between calls, or pre-deciding tomorrow's outfit. Run that test and see if you notice how the benefit reaches further than the action itself. That experiment reveals the principle in real time. Even a single adjustment opens space for recovery that amplifies forward. Energy debt is predictable once you know the system. The fatigue that feels overwhelming isn't mysterious. It's compounded pressure from drains working together. And because compounding cuts both ways, the very dynamic that traps you in exhaustion is the one that can deliver escape. It starts small, tips momentum, and builds from there. And when that realization clicks, recovery no longer feels distant. It becomes available in shifts so modest they fit into a single day. And this sets the stage for the next step. Because compounding doesn't just explain why you feel worn out. It also shows why small, structured actions can rebuild energy with surprising speed. The path out isn't a massive reinvention. It's a series of simple moves that start carrying you forward the moment you try them. A system to reclaim your energy. If the drains in your day are predictable, the solution has to be predictable too. That's why the most reliable approach is a simple, repeatable system designed to restore energy without adding more workload. Think of it as a 3-step framework you can test immediately: audit, cap, and micro-rest. Each step is small enough to implement in a single day, but together they create the conditions for your brain to stop leaking resources and start protecting them. The first step is the audit. Most people describe fatigue as "I'm just tired," without knowing what actually emptied them out. The audit turns that feeling into data. Instead of guessing, track your energy 4 times a day for 1 week. Rate yourself on a 1 to 10 scale in the morning, before lunch, mid-afternoon, and again in the evening. Alongside the scores, jot down what was happening around the dips. Was it your 3rd meeting of the morning? A cluster of Slack pings. A half-hour lost to evening scrolling? After 7 days, you'll have a map of recurring energy leaks. Seeing the patterns on paper shifts fatigue from something foggy and mysterious into something measurable and fixable. Importantly, the audit doesn't require constant journaling. It's 4 quick ratings across the day, a 2-minute practice. By the end of the week, you'll know which 1 or 2 drains hit hardest, giving you a concrete place to start. Step 2 is capping. The goal here is not strict bans that collapse after a few days, but practical limits that reduce constant exposure. Pick the single biggest drain from your audit and set a cap you can hold with minimal effort. For most people, email and messaging is the first win. Instead of checking reflexively every few minutes, fix 3 exact windows, for example, 9:30, 1:30, and 4:30. Use those times to clear your inbox, then close it completely outside the windows. Research on knowledge workers shows this simple boundary reduces both interruptions and decision fatigue significantly. The same logic applies to chat platforms. Mute non-essential channels, or set Do Not Disturb modes during focus blocks. For video calls, try restricting camera-on meetings to external clients or high-stakes discussions, while making internal check-ins camera optional. Each of these caps minimizes hidden performance costs. The key is not perfection. It's one clear change that shrinks leaks into manageable size. Attention caps work best when applied to task switching too. Momentum is fragile, and once broken, it takes 15 to 23 minutes for most people to regain peak focus. A realistic cap is to preserve at least one uninterrupted 25-minute focus block before you allow yourself to switch. If you find a rhythm, you can extend that block naturally toward 50 or 60 minutes, matching what's known as ultradian rhythms, natural energy cycles that peak every 50 to 90 minutes before dipping. The aim isn't rigid scheduling, but protecting stretches of uninterrupted thought so loops can close fully. Each cap you add buys back clarity, stacking small wins that save more energy than they cost. Step 3 is building in micro-rest and movement. Because the nervous system never resets by itself in a static chair, you must give it small release points. The good news is you don't need long breaks that are impossible in modern schedules. Just 90 to 120 seconds each hour is enough to reset physiological strain. That might mean standing up and stretching, walking to refill a glass of water, or looking out the window and deliberately focusing your eyes on a spot 20 feet away for 20 seconds. These actions regulate cortisol, restore oxygen to the brain, and reduce eye strain that silently compounds over hours. Anchoring micro breaks at the top of each hour keeps them automatic and less negotiable. If longer breaks are possible, match them to ultradian cycles, work for 50 to 90 minutes, then take 5 to 10 minutes off screens. But even if you only manage short resets, the accumulation protects your system from the steady weight of uninterrupted strain. What holds the 3 steps together is scale. An audit takes 2 minutes 4 times daily. A cap resets a few boundaries, like fixed email windows or camera-optional policies. A micro-rest is 2 minutes of movement or gaze reset. None of them ask for more discipline than you already spend scrolling or checking, and yet the compounding effect is significant. Within a week, you'll start seeing signals. Afternoons feel lighter, inboxes feel less suffocating, evenings hold more energy for ordinary tasks. These are not instant transformations, but cumulative returns on small deposits. Improvements surface not months later, but in days to 2 weeks. Clarity emerges because you steadily stopped taxing the system in ways you didn't notice before. Here's a simple way to approach it. Do the audit for 7 days. At the end, pick one drain that shows up most often. Cap it the following week using one of the low-friction boundaries, like 3 scheduled email checks or muting a noisy chat channel. Then layer in 1 micro-rest trigger every hour. That's the full system in practice. A 7-day audit, 1 cap drain, and 1 added reset. Adding more steps is tempting, but unnecessary. The advantage lies in momentum, not overhauling everything at once. What will surprise you is how these adjustments interact. Tracking your energy makes you more conscious of drains, which makes caps easier to hold. Caps create cleaner space for focus, reducing residue and stress. That calm makes it easier to take micro breaks without guilt. Each one reinforces the others, turning 3 small actions into a layered buffer against fatigue. You may not double your capacity overnight, but you'll feel your resources stop slipping so quickly between your fingers. And when that shift begins, the proof is tangible. Meetings that used to leave you blank feel easier to process. You finish afternoons with enough attention left to make clear decisions instead of deferring them. Even evenings look different. You still want downtime, but you no longer feel cornered into mindless scrolling because you have energy left to choose other options. This isn't about forcing efficiency into every corner of your day. It's about quieting the drains so recovery happens naturally in the cracks. What makes this system workable is that it strips pressure away instead of adding more. For someone already stretched, elaborate routines are just another kind of drain. A tiny 3-step framework aligns better with reality. It doesn't pretend interruptions vanish or that work schedules will ever feel gentle. It just contains enough to stop biology from running in the red all the time. Over weeks, the difference is hard to miss. Mornings feel clearer, afternoons feel steadier, and evenings stop collapsing into frustration. The takeaway isn't perfection, it's balance. Energy drains compound, but so does recovery. By running the audit, capping just 1 or 2 repeating drains, and anchoring micro-rest into each hour, you steadily reverse the curve. The gains are subtle at first, but measurable, and they grow. What matters most is that they are achievable inside a normal, chaotic workweek, not theoretical fixes, but practices tested within the same conditions that created the fatigue. And seeing results makes it easier to continue. Once you register differences in your own data, seeing an afternoon energy score of 6 where it used to be a 3, you no longer need external motivation. The numbers themselves demonstrate progress. At that point, adding another cap or another small break feels less like discipline and more like protection. You begin designing around energy the same way you once designed around tasks. Restoring energy this way won't feel dramatic. It will feel steady, incremental, and grounded, and that's exactly what matters. Fatigue doesn't arise in one giant hit. It builds from dozens of small leaks. The answer isn't punishing yourself for being weak. It's changing the structures that keep taxing you invisibly. With a system to reclaim energy, you're no longer guessing why you feel drained. You're addressing it directly, in steps you can track and sustain. And once you've experienced what even a partial reversal feels like, something else becomes clear. Exhaustion wasn't proof of laziness, it was the cost of the environment surrounding you. The three-step system doesn't just restore stamina, it reframes the problem. Your biology is sound, your context is mismatched. And when you adjust the context, clarity returns, which is the exact insight you'll need to carry forward next. Exhaustion after a desk day isn't a personal flaw. It's the byproduct of an environment that keeps draining mental energy in ways you barely notice. Your body may feel rested, but your brain is carrying hidden weight from constant switching, alerts, and unfinished loops. That overload is not weakness. It's biology reacting to conditions it was never designed for. Here's your first move. Take 60 seconds right now and write down 2 things that drained you yesterday. This week, commit to a 7-day energy audit and share one unexpected drain you discover in the comments. Remember the system: audit your drains, cap your biggest leak, and add micro rest. 3 small steps that return energy instead of letting it disappear.